and remember, serve and remember.
And as Teresa said, my name is Reverend Belinda Lightheart. My ordination was last month.
That's what I thought you were saying. Is there anything new?
Yeah. So it's kind of a big thing to be able to be an ordained unity minister, and I'm grateful for the opportunity and especially the support of this congregation in being in this place at this time. One of the things that I know to be true is that we have a different way of looking at heaven and hell in unity. And in some Christian traditions, there is this separate place where we go that is called heaven. And at the entrance to that place, we find the pearly gates, and we might find a bearded fellow named St. Peter who's letting people in. Anyone ever have that image as a child or perhaps at another time? So what we know about that is that St. Peter one day was deciding, I have been doing this for a long time and I need a break. And he was looking for some assistance. He didn't know exactly what that might look like. So he's just imagining what it would be like to practice a little self-care. So when he does that, poof, guess who appears in front of him but Jesus? Well, there you go. You got a great opportunity. So he says, Jesus, I have a question for you. Can you help me out here? I need to take a little time away. And can you help me by letting the people in that are ready to come in? And Jesus says, well, sure, just tell me what to do. I'm happy to do that. So what he does is he says, you just bring them over to the receiving area. You sit them down and you have a conversation. You ask them, you say, okay, what is your name? You start with the simple stuff. And then you ask them a few other questions. Tell me how you lived your life, what you did, some of your accomplishments. And when they do that, what happens is Jesus gets to make the determination as to whether or not they can go ahead and pass through the pearly gates. Jesus says, no problem, I can do that. Go take a break. Off goes Peter. So then Jesus sits down in the receiving area and the first gentleman comes up. He sits at the table that is prepared there for him, and Jesus begins with the questions. Verse 1, can you tell me your name? And the gentleman says, oh, my son, that's not important. And he goes, okay, well, let me ask a few other questions. And he says, well, the other thing I can ask you is, what did you do for a living? The man replies, I was a carpenter. The people in my village were so appreciative of my work, I made many things with wood. Well, Jesus begins to get interested at this point because he knows his earthly father, Joseph, was a carpenter, and that was the practice that he learned, the trade he learned as a child and as a young man. So he thought, well, this is pretty cool stuff. Let me ask him some more questions. All right, what was your greatest accomplishment? And the man's reply was, to rear my loving son. It was the most wonderful thing I did. And Jesus says, oh, really? Wow. Can you tell me something about your son that was unique? Well, the most unique and unusual thing about him was that he had holes in his hands and his feet. And Jesus leans in and says, Father? And the man replies, Pinocchio? But what we're looking for here is connection, my friends. We notice that what Jesus was exemplifying was an opportunity to connect with someone he had yet not met, and to connect from his heart because he was calling up his own childhood, his own youth. And isn't that what we want to do? The song that we just heard from our beautiful musicians, Love, Serve, and Remember, is how we can show up in humanity and to be that beautiful presence that we are. And one of the things that I know to be true is that we are here to love, to serve, and remember. And I'm taking my earring off because it's interfering with the microphone. Okay. So this is part of humanity that we are. And in that song, we know that this is our mission. We're here to walk a path that allows us to connect with our divine nature, our spiritual essence. And this desire is what may bring us into a loving spiritual community such as this one. And my friends, I'm honoring your bravery for being out in this weather today. You know, some people have snowstorms. We have heat storms. And we are in the midst of one right now with triple-digit weather for the next few days. But I am grateful that each and every one of you are here this morning. Now, we know that when we find a spiritual community, when we participate in a spiritual community, we feel like we found our tribe. And our tribe is something that nurtures and supports us. You see, while I was born in Wyoming, I grew up in a suburb of New Orleans next to the 9th Ward. And we conducted an annual tribal ritual. It began at the front of every hurricane season. I don't know about any of you who have been through hurricanes, but it's a process. We'd tape the windows, stock up on batteries, make sure the flashlights worked, make sure there were enough canned goods, and we would inventory our first aid supplies. We'd prune back any stray branches, and then when hurricanes drew closer to the Gulf, we filled containers with water, and then we bought some ice because inevitably the refrigeration would go out. That just seemed to be a process. The electricity would do its thing. And at that time, the ice came from an ice plant. Great big blocks of ice that had to be lifted with tongs and then chipped into smaller pieces. Yeah, it's been a while. But what I know to be true is that that was a process. It was a ritual that the entire community participated in doing. And we didn't have bottled water back then either. We just drew the water from the taps and filled up the tubs so that we had enough water for what we needed. We would set everything in place and then we would wait for the storm. And you see, often the hurricane would result in rain. A couple of times we got a little inside the house and that made it so that we had to sweep it out and that sort of thing. But for the most part, the water just came up to the foundation. You see, it didn't happen that way every time. In 1965, we had a hurricane that actually filled the water in the homes in our part of the neighborhood 5 feet. And the further back we were in the neighborhood, the further closer to the levee, rather, the deeper the water. And what we found was that it was almost a year before our home could be rebuilt and we could return to it. There wasn't any insurance at that time. That just wasn't something that was available. So my dad did it all himself. And in that year, which was 1965, it was predicted that an even greater storm would occur in 40 years' time. And we all know that she came in 2005, and her name was Katrina, exactly 40 years later. You see, my childhood home was leveled that year. The way they built the homes in that time was on piles that were driven into the ground. Anyone ever familiar with a pile driver? It was this huge piece of equipment that drove 50-foot piles into Mother Earth and then put them adjacent to one another so that a foundation could be poured on top, and the concrete with the rebar in it was added to make the foundation for the house. And what we knew was that every time we heard the sound of a pile driver, it meant a new family was being added to the community. So it was an interesting sound. You see, the community that we had was one that took care of each other. There was a sense of safety in knowing that my friends' parents were looking out for me no matter what was happening. And the bumps and the bruises and the scrapes of childhood gave way to heartbreak and devastation and that profound loss that we had in the hurricane. You see, by then I had already become deeply rooted in my Presbyterian faith, and my mantra, although I didn't know the word mantra at that age, was God never gives me more than I can handle. God never gives me more than I can handle was what took me through a lot of life's human condition experiences. Who in here has ever experienced a time of deep sadness? You see, when that happened for me, absolutely, absolutely. What was our first reaction? I can speak for myself and say, I wanted to be away from that feeling. Wanted to have anything else to do but be there in that moment. It was tough. And what I really have also learned is that being with the pain and sorrow actually helps us to move through it to the other side. It's a huge process, and it's one that takes some courage. You see, anyone ever familiar with the rodeo bull riding? The talk title comes from that. And we know about that 8-second rule in bull riding. And what it does is it allows a rider to sit atop a 1-ton, bucking, snorting, not too happy animal, but his goal is to be there for 8 seconds. 8 seconds. And of course, then the judges make their determination on who actually wins the competition. You would probably have heard the words, looking for 8 when they pull that gate, and I hope that judge ain't blind. Yeah. But doesn't that sound like the human condition? Doesn't that sound like when we find ourselves in a human experience that's bucking and trying to throw us off, that we want to be anywhere but there? You think those bull riders are really 100% into what they're doing all the time? I imagine there's some moments when they are wondering why that's their vocation. Yet at some soul level, we have signed up, just as they have, to be exactly where we are in that moment. What if we choose to stay with it just for 8 seconds? Just for 8 seconds. To breathe into it and to go through to the other side. What if we choose to fully immerse ourselves in the angst and the misery, whatever that looks like? What if we take it a bit further and stay with that bucking bronc or that bucking bull for a full 2 minutes? You see, what I've learned along the way is that 2 minutes is kind of a magical number. We get a 2-minute warning in football. We know that 2 minutes makes a difference in a lot of things in our lives. We can cook an egg in that amount of time. But to stay with whatever it is for just 2 minutes, we can find that it begins to abate. Because what we're doing otherwise is we are applying the third unity principle in reverse. That third principle is the idea that, we call it the law of mind action, but it's thoughts held in mind and heart will produce after their kind. And when we resist something, what is happening is we are producing resistance. So the idea is to just be with it and ride through it. And you see, this is a gift, and I choose that word deliberately because each of our life experiences serve as gifts. When Katrina refugees came to Austin, I was able to be at the convention center and to really be with the people, to deeply connect with them, because I knew what it was like to be homeless. I knew what it was like to be uncertain. I knew what it was like to have your home wiped away by a hurricane. And whenever I look back at my childhood and my family of origin, I grew up with a mom who was addicted to drugs, who suffered from schizophrenia, who was paranoid, and a father who was an alcoholic. So I can come to you understanding what it's like living that way. And those are some of the things that have helped me to realize that we don't have to look at those life experiences in a way that is detrimental or negative or uncomfortable, but rather we can look at them as tools that can take us into a level of compassion we might not have felt otherwise. You see, Khalil Gibran gives us this statement that I think is very powerful. Pain is the breaking of a shell that encloses understanding. So what is the gift that we find when that shell breaks? We find a level of understanding we may not have ever realized was there. You see, it's a powerful truth, and when we realize that understanding is the gateway to compassion, we also know that it is perfect because it allows us to be present to what is right in front of us. You see, these aspects of the human condition are all amazing in our lives. And as Brene Brown puts it, we can rise strong. We can come through to the other side. Jesus, our master teacher and elder brother, had something to share regarding our work here on earth. And this comes from the 22nd chapter of Matthew. The Pharisees got together. You know how they do. And one of them tested Jesus with this question, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself." This implies that we not only love ourselves, but that we love everyone else. No exceptions. Can you imagine what someone might feel if they're the target of repeated thoughts of negativity, hatred, and ill will? And now imagine how much better they can function if that energy is shifted toward compassion. A story that I have about this has to do with a supervisor in a place of work whose team really had a hard time working with him. One thing after another, they found that they would be polite, but they just couldn't even think nice thoughts about the way that he behaved. And one of them said, "Okay, let's try something different. We can't change him, but we can change ourselves." And what they did was they began to think kindly. They dug and dug to try and find the kindest things they could about this person. And the more they did it, the more they began to actually enjoy being at work, which was a huge, huge difference from the way they had felt. And over time, the manager began to feel differently as well. What he noticed was that the people around him were caring differently. They were choosing to show up a little bit differently. And not only did he behave differently in the workplace, but this carried over to his home. The way he treated his wife, the way he treated his son. And his life began to change. So thoughts that we hold in consciousness do have an impact on the world. And ours is to simply notice, not judge, just notice. Thoughts held in heart and mind do produce after their kind. When we understand we're all connected and our thoughts go into the thought amalgam, if you will, of human consciousness, we realize that positive thoughts contribute positively to the collective good, and we are lifting the vibratory level of human consciousness. Matthew Kahn, he is the author of Whatever Arises, Love That, a book that Tony recently taught here. And I don't know how many of you were able to participate in that group, but it's a fabulous book. If you weren't able to do so, you would probably enjoy reading it. And what he shares is that in that book of Matthew's, the title says so much, but what he's also telling us is the same thing that our master teacher told us. He talks about love and how important it is in our lives. He talks about how we are to show up as the presence of love in the world, and not just for one another, but for ourselves as well. You see, this is all what we've commissioned to do here. And we can track this through human evolution by the work of Don Beck. Who's heard of spiral dynamics? The idea of spiral dynamics is that we, as a human species, are actually evolving over time. And he shows from the time of the origin of humanity all the way to the present how we have moved our consciousness. So each thought that we are contributing to the collective is lifting the consciousness of the world. Don Beck's biosocial spiritual map of the living systems charts the evolution and emergence of human development. And as a collective, we sought and found a better way and evolved to embrace it. That evolution, my friends, continues. It continues. And whenever we find ourselves out of alignment, it is the universe telling us we are not vibrationally in alignment with who we have become. I want you to really hear that. You see, it's not about who we're supposed to be or who we thought we were, but who we have become. And this is not about doing something wrong. Rather, it's about embracing the new me and standing in this truth at this moment. The power that made the body heals the body. This is a quote from Joe Dispenza. He's a chiropractor turned lecturer. Some of you may have heard of him as well. And he shares an experience that he had during a triathlon in 1986. While he was biking, he pulled out in front of a Jeep that was going 55 miles an hour. Flew into the air and landed in a way that compressed his spine. The doctors all told him that he had to have surgery. Went to 4 different specialists, and he got the same story over and over again. You have to have surgery. And what he realized was that there was another way. He just knew in his heart of hearts, his training as a chiropractor, his experience in life said there's got to be another way than to have all these rods implanted in his spine and to live that way the rest of his life. So what he did was he grasped the meaning of that age-old law, that third principle, and chose to go home and apply it. He realized that thoughts held in heart and mind will produce after their kind. And like our Unity co-founder, Myrtle Fillmore, who prayed and healed herself from tuberculosis, he was able to use that enthusiasm, that heart energy, and to couple it with visualization, which is the mind piece, to produce a deliberate and powerful conduit for healing. After 12 weeks of doing this, he was able to return to life as he knew it. So what he realized was he didn't have to go through the surgery, but he could instead choose to choose differently. So when we add the heart to our visualization process, when we add the emotion, when we answer the questions, what is it that I really want for myself, for the world, for my family, for my church, for whatever is important? What is it that I really want? The passion begins to move in us, and we're able to add that to our visualization process, because that's what catches the attention of the universe to move within, to move as us in this world. Spirit needs that passion. You see, our brain holds a record of the past, and the visualization process helps us to rework that past, because the more we visualize, we are creating a new level of past. Instead of having all of those things that we've experienced, we're adding to that all of the things that we have chosen to hold in consciousness. And when we introduce a new way of being through visualization and mindfulness, we are recreating it. And this actually allows us to reroute our neural network. We know about neuroplasticity, the brain, and what science has actually caught up to what we know and shown us to be true, or shown to be true. You see, thoughts are the language of the brain, and feelings are the language of the body. And when we join them together in a positive way, our lives begin to transform. As we walk our spiritual path, we feel that we've learned much along the way, and we may wonder why our new spiritual selves should ever experience discord in our lives. Anyone ever have that feeling? I should know better. Why did I do that? What was I thinking? We were being human. So give ourselves a break and know that it's not about having to do something a certain way, or because we have a place of authority in the world, whatever that looks like. It's not because we have a title, or what I like to call alphabet soup after our name, but it's because we're in these skin suits on the spaceship Earth, moving around that beautiful sun of ours. We are living in this experience, and we're learning every step of the way. Those difficult experiences come back to serve us. Those awkward moments come back as teachers. Each and every one of these things is truly a gift. And while it may not seem like it in the moment, I would suggest that we take a moment to breathe and look again and see exactly what that gift can be. There's a lovely Hasidic story of a rabbi who always told his people that if they studied the Torah, God would put scripture on their hearts. And one of them asked, why on our hearts and not in them? The rabbi replied, only God can put scripture in our hearts. But reading texts that are sacred can put them on our hearts. And when our hearts break, the holy words fall in. Yeah. A woman named Agnes Goncha Bohachev is often quoted with having said, may God break my heart so completely that the whole world falls in. My friends, you know this woman as Mother Teresa. And what her work did on this planet was to begin the idea of taking care of the poorest of the poor. When she was 18, she became a novitiate. When she was 36, she was called within her calling to serve in what was then Calcutta and now Calcutta, India. What she finds herself doing is found herself doing is showing up for everyone. She was modeling the work of our master teacher. She was showing up just like our elder brother did. Her Samaritans were lepers, but she showed up in a way that was absolutely perfect. You see, in 1950, she founded the Order of the Missionaries of Charity. And this is a group that now consists of over 4,500 novitiates and nuns, and they serve in over 140 countries. And we know that when she served, there was a balance. She had one foot in this earthly realm and one foot in the spiritual realm. One of the other quotes that she's noted for having saying is that she is the hands and feet of God, just as we are. We are each the hands and feet of God, and we serve in whatever way Spirit calls us to serve. Whether it's to smile at someone we don't know, whether it's to shake the hand of a new person that we're just now meeting, whether it's to give consolation to a child who scraped his or her knee. What we're doing is we are showing up as the hands and feet of God. Jesus told us that the greatest commandment is to love one another and to love our neighbor as ourselves. We learn through our life experiences that to serve is to be those hands and feet. And we know that we are divine beings living here on earth in this time and space to love and serve precious humanity. What we allow ourselves to do at this moment is to simply open our hearts to surrender to that beautiful place within. That beautiful place of joy, of peace, and understanding as we take this time of our service into meditation.
I will surrender to my greatest, highest good. I will release any fear that blocks my way. For every step I take is taken in pure faith. And I am kinder every moment, every day. And I'm more loving every moment, every day. I will surrender every moment, every day.
surrender, to simply let go of any regrets, any expectations, any concerns, and to feel ourselves moving in this space of pure peace. Surrender to the love that is God as us. To surrender to the peace that passes all understanding. And to surrender to this moment in time. We allow ourselves to open our hearts even wider. Because we know that in so doing, we are sacred containers for all of precious humanity. We feel this opportunity to be in this time and space one of grace. And we surrender to the wisdom that is God in our lives. And as we focus our attention on simply breathing, we allow that breath of God, that ruach, to flow through us, in us, and as us. We surrender, knowing that this is the deepest and richest form of connection to the truth of who we are and who we have come here to be. And we just let those words flow through us for a moment in the silence. Beloveds, we are here as the hands, feet, and joy of God. We are here to connect with one another, to remember to love precious humanity, to serve with a servant's heart, and to embody that Christ presence that we are in this time and space. And knowing these things from our heart of hearts, we give thanks for these truths and for this moment of quiet, peaceful surrender. And so it is. And so we choose it to be. And when you're ready, I invite you to simply bring your attention back into this room and open your beautiful eyes.
We at Unity in the Heart of Austin are committed to inspiring people to awaken to their unique divine nature through spiritual teachings, through heart-to-heart connections, through prayer, and through sacred service. And we provide tools, spiritual tools, that allow you to live your best possible life. I'm Reverend Tony Roebuck, minister at Unity in the Heart of Austin, and I truly hope that you are inspired by and that you are transformed by, you enjoy this week's spiritual message. And if you would like to leave a donation, a tithe, to help the work of this ministry in supporting you and others like you, then we are truly grateful for your generosity and for helping to make the world a better place. Because we know that life is meant to be good.